And I was thinking about this, and I'm going to put you to the test. Bishop, I don't get to do this often, so of course I'm going to put you to the test. Do you recognize this person? Do you recognize this person?
Should we? Should we?
Probably not.
Okay.
But in some respects, she is historic, and I'll tell you why. She's an American, or was. She passed away 2 years ago. This is a young photograph of her. She grew up in Chicago and went to nursing school, became a nurse. I was thinking about this, and Pastor Ted's story sort of, strangely enough, made a connection. Her name is actually, her family name is Janet Rosenberg. Okay. And I can tell from your face, no one has said, oh, Janet Rosenberg. Okay. She is Jewish, and her married, she got married and took her husband's name, as is so often the tradition, and she became Janet Jagan. Still nothing?
Janet who?
Jagan. Jagan. Now, here is the thing. Her husband is Cheddi Jagan, okay, who is the former president of that little country called Guyana. And Cheddi Jagan was a young man who came to this country to study and went to Chicago, went to Northwestern, and became and studied. He didn't just become, but studied and became a dental surgeon. And while there, he met Janet Rosenberg. And, you know, it's the American love story. They fell in love. Her parents were against it. She is Jewish. He is Hindu. She lives here. He lives there. You know, the whole thing. But they got married. And Janet Rosenberg, Janet Jagan, went with her husband to Guyana. And as they say, the rest is history. She never came back. I mean, visits, but never came back. Why is this a big deal for us as we think about it? Her husband, who would become the president of Guyana, and circumstances led him to that place, would die of a heart attack while in this country on a visit, you know, as president. And after he passed away, Janet Jagan became the president of Guyana. So in case you're looking for trivia as to who the first American woman that would be a head of state, welcome to Janet Rosenberg Jagan.
Predates King Peggy, huh? Okay.
Very much predates King Peggy and predates any other woman who would be president. I say that because when she arrived there, before my time, the country welcomed her. She was an outsider. She was a foreigner. And this is a country made up primarily of three major religions: Christianity, Hinduism, and to a much lesser degree, Islam. And you may find a Jewish person someplace along the way, but this would not be a regular feature. And yet, Janet Jagan became the president of the country, and they welcomed her. I said this in part because, yes, we could look at biblical, which we will in a second, but there are realities in our lives where outsiders are welcome in ways that sometimes are astounding. In this case, so much so that you become the head of state in a country that welcomed you, where very few, if you will, at that time, after independence, you have Americans there. You have a handful of Portuguese and British, being a former British colony, but really, and yet she became a part of the people. So in case we wonder if in fact there are circumstances today, in this day, that are not only sort of a long ago biblical reminiscence, we do have those. It's possible. Which brings me to a different story. And it's the story of a woman by the name of Rahab. Okay, Rahab, anyone? Okay. Here's the thing about Rahab. One, she is not well known. I don't know how else to put it, right? It's not the story that, you gather the children around for the first Sunday in Advent and say, I think we're going to read the story of Rahab today. No one does that. And if you do, I think you should get help. No one does that. Okay? In part because of the nature of the story. It's very short, and you have it in front of you. Okay? Rahab, there is no sort of, there is no veneer here. There is no euphemism here. There is none of that. Rahab is simply described as a prostitute. Okay? And depending which translation you might be using, we're using New Revised Standard Version, there are different words that are used to describe Rahab. And yet she has a role to play. And this is what I want to get at, and we're going to read just this very short text. We know about Joshua, and we know about Jericho, and we know about circling the city 7 times, and what happens? The walls fall down, and the children applaud. Okay, but this is different. This is different. This is something that Rahab does that is a reminder to all of us of both courage and, frankly, a sense of the world in which we live. So it goes like this. Joshua, of course, sent 2 men. We heard about this. Go view the land, especially Jericho. They went, they entered the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab. I mean, this is how you get, this is how you get identified, right? We don't know who your parents are. We don't know who your spouse is. We don't know who your children are. The only thing we know about you, you're a prostitute, right? This is the only word that has come to define this woman. But the story should not end there, and that's the thing about it. That's the thing about it. So they spend the night there. Now, I have to tell you, Alan is shaking his head thinking, people will talk. And in fact, people will talk. Where were you last night? Well, I was traveling, and the only place was, it was in the red light district. And I spent the night in a house. Her name was Rahab. But nothing happened. Okay. By the way, of course it's scandalous, right? And yet she provided for them this moment, this place to stay. And thankfully, sometimes the biblical text could be very scandalous, as you well know, right? It's not here. They don't go into detail, by the way, check the footnotes to see what happened. She simply provided a place for them to stay, and importantly, to protect them, because they are entering into a land that is not ready to welcome them. How do we know that? The text tells us that. And she is aware of this. So it says, immediately some Israelites have come here tonight to spend, the king of Jericho. By the way, the king of Jericho, this is not just an emissary, right? You know, I mean, this is what we would call a hands-on king, right? Somebody enters the house of a prostitute and somehow the king knows about this. We don't even want to find out how he knows about this. Okay. Kangaroo king. But he knows about this. And he wants to find out, who are these two people? So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out the whole land. Okay. Have you heard that language before? Bring out the men to me, or to us. We have heard that language almost verbatim twice. We've heard it in the great story, great not in a wonderful way, but great as in Sodom and Gomorrah. Bring out, right? Right? And Lot, who I've said before and I'll repeat right now, will never be on my list of Father of the Year candidate. Okay. And then the Levite later on in the book of Judges. This is not an invitation to bring out the men so that we could shake hands and say, welcome to Jericho. Something is amiss here, and Rahab is aware of this. So here we go. Bring out the men who have come to you, who've entered the house, for they have come to search out the land. But the woman took the two men and hid them. And she said, true, the men came out, but I did not know where they came from, and when it was time to close the gate at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them. She had, however, brought them to the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. Now, many of us, I don't mean in this group because we are enlightened, but many of us would not like this idea, because is Rahab truthful? No. By the way, don't turn yourselves into pretzels here, right? The answer is no. Does she tell the emissary of the king the truth? No. And not just, she not only doesn't tell, this is kind of like a triple negative here, okay? She doesn't only not tell.
She tells, but doesn't tell the truth. She says something, just not the truth.
Just not the truth. But not only does she not tell the truth about the man, right? She makes up a story, right? Oh, no. In fact, I tell you what, they went out that way. And I think, actually, if you really went quickly, you're probably going to find them. Meanwhile, back at the farm, right, they're sort of in the flax, right? They're hiding. You know, courage, we talk about it, we like the idea, right? We love the idea of being courageous, don't we? All of us want to be courageous. What's our problem? Actually being courageous. But don't get me wrong, I just love the idea of being courageous, you know.
But we don't know why she did it.
Well, we're going to find out why she did it.
That's good.
You want to put that in writing? Okay. We're going to find out why she did it, right? There is something about Rahab who recognizes, right? But we don't have the details here. We really don't. And there are some questions. Let's be very clear. These are two, and they're described, so it's not my language, they're described as spies, right? We'll call them scouts. Because we're just nice people. So they're out scouting out a land that evidently, track with me here now, belongs to others. But because they're our guys, and because we love Rahab, wink, wink, we're not going to deal with that issue. Right? But that is an issue. And Rahab hides them. We'll get to this in a second. Rahab hides them. Before they went to sleep, they came up to the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen on us, and all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you. And one could say the whole thing is transactional. One might say that, right? It feels very transactional. Listen, I know you guys are going to take over this land, and I know that the Lord. So Rahab is aware of Yahweh. And I say not just God, because the language in Hebrew here is the name Yahweh that is used. Okay? The God of Israel. Rahab is aware of this. So Rahab is saying, listen, you guys are going to take this land. I know the Lord has sent you here. I'm in. And I'm going to do what I need to do to ensure that, in fact, you are protected. So she sends the emissaries on a goose chase and away. Go run after these guys. But then she says, and you will see in the text, there's a little ellipsis here, right? As we move on, there are some other details. But now then, since I have dealt kindly with you, swear to me by the Lord that you will in turn deal kindly with my family. Listen, I'm helping you out here. Will you help me out? And by the way, I don't just want you to say, oh, sure, I'll help you out. What do I want?
A promise, a guarantee.
I want you to swear on the Lord. By the way, it's interesting. I don't want you to swear on your favorite pet. I don't want you to swear on your kids. I want you to swear on the name Yahweh. Are you going to do this? So I have not just upped the ante. If you're going to do this, you're going to have to do this at this level. I want you to make this promise. And you remember, last week I asked the question, what do you think? And I think you can have many answers here. I was looking for one in particular. I said, what do you think really, as human beings, ultimately propels us, right? And what I was getting at, remember we were talking about Hannah, and she was in the temple, and after, the priest Eli he didn't begin in a glorious way. He thought she was, drunk. But ultimately would come around and he says, the Lord has heard you, and go, and this is what's going to happen, right? By the way, did it happen immediately? No. But she was able to eat, she was able to drink, she was able to sleep. The things that somehow had caused her such grief that she couldn't do what normal human beings typically did. But she went away with what? A promise. She went away with a promise that this is going to happen. And she took that word. Okay? Rahab is saying, I want that word. I want a promise. And in this day and age, right, I'm sorry, but we're living in a time where sometimes, despite what we might think, the spoken word has become a casualty along the way. simply for convenience. So don't worry, in the next 2 weeks, I'll provide the best thing you've ever seen for take your pick. And when 2 weeks come and go, what happens? I'll give you another couple weeks. By the way, I could make this up over and over, and what happens after a while? There's not only is there not anything, you don't believe this anymore, because the idea of the spoken word has become an absolute casualty along the way. But do not forget that it was through the spoken word that creation in the first instance came into being. Remember, it is the spoken word. God said, "Let there be," and there was. Let there be and there was, let there be and there was. It was the spoken word, which is to say, the spoken word has become an event. The moment you speak, something has happened. And we have this experience in our everyday lives, right? We know that. And she is saying, "I want a promise. Give me a sign of good faith that you will spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters and all who belong to, pardon me, and deliver our lives from death." And the men said to her, "Our life for yours. If you do not tell this business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land." And we would be right in being a little bit, isn't this what you're supposed to say? Listen, if you can give me the land, sure, yeah. Right? But the word matters. The word matters. But the men did say, "If you tell this business of ours," so they warn her, "Sure, we're going to promise you this, but I will tell you, if you tell anyone, then we shall be released from the oath that you have made us swear to you." She said, "According to the words, so be it." She sent them away, they departed. She tied the crimson cord on the window. By the way, again, we have this idea, right, about who the Lord will recognize and that kind of thing. We have this in Exodus with, of course, the doorpost and so on. Tie a crimson cord, and so we will know. They departed, went into the hill country, stayed there for 3 days. You can see the symbolism here. Until the pursuers returned. The pursuers had searched all along the way and found nothing. I'm shocked. Right? Then the two men came down again from the hill country. They said to Joshua, "Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, the inhabitants of the land melt in fear of us." All right. What do you make of Rahab? This is open-ended now. What do you make of Rahab? Smart? Liberated? Enlightened? Why? Was it because she was a prostitute?
She hears things, so she knows what's going on around.
I mean, what do we have here? Of all the people that the Lord could choose, Rahab? And my thing is, well, why not? She's a and our leaders as businessmen, that's going really well, right? Yeah. She knows transaction, doesn't she?
You said transactional. I thought, yeah, it's transactional.
It is transactional. But before we point the finger to Rahab, we'll look at a couple other instances here. Remember, who does Jesus repeatedly choose to make a point, particularly in his stories and his parables? Women, thank you for playing, true. One of whom I think mistakenly is often identified as a Prostitute. And because she is a prostitute, right? No. It does not ever, 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 ever say that. But, okay, yeah, we all have them, right? Maybe 8, 9, 10 demons. But who does Jesus often identify as a group, individually, but also as a group? Samaritans. Remember, these outsiders, and not just one time, repeatedly, these are the outcasts. And yet it is the outcasts who repeatedly, whether it's the woman at the well, who then will have to take this message, right? And by the way, the fact that you don't believe this message, that's on you. Because she, we have a few details here, right, about her. Not exactly the American love story, but she is the messenger that Jesus chooses. Or, of course, the Samaritan, right, the Good Samaritan. When the religious folks are walking on the other side of the street, it is this Good Samaritan. And think how demeaning it must be to have your identity be sort of defined with an adjective, good. Because the bottom line is that Samaritans were not perceived to be, well, good. They're outsiders. You remember that old line? What good could possibly come out of, right? And then there's the healing of the 10, right? Sometimes pain and grief could make very strange bedfellows. So you had Jews and Samaritans walking together. And what do they have in common? An illness. And who comes back? Right? So this idea of an outsider is not unusual. And Rahab stands out. Now, does genealogy matter? You notice I didn't put it in the form of a question, right? Not does genealogy matter or why does it's a statement, right? Because all of us would like to know what? Where we came from. It's a little tougher to know where we're going, right? But where we came from. Because often where we came from will give us some idea, right? And I'm emphasizing it will give us some idea. It does not give us conclusive ideas. And we know that because I have this. Where we have come from, where we're going, and then the idea of the acorn and the oak. You cannot judge the acorn as, well, you're an acorn and there is nothing good. I mean, what could possibly come out of this, right? Nothing. And you cannot look at an oak and imagine that you could possibly have come from an acorn. Because, it's just not possible. Except, of course, it is. So, what do we know about Rahab outside of this story? Remember a certain book in the New Testament our friend Martin Luther was not, how should we say, fond of. The book of James, which he somewhat disparagingly referred to as the book of straw. Now, far be it from me to say, Brother Martin, you were, I don't know, wrong. But let me go ahead and do that, and if lightning doesn't strike me in the next 30 seconds, I think we're okay. Because, of course, The idea is that we are saved by grace through faith, with a period there. And I would like to suggest that maybe there is a comma, or if you prefer a longer wait, a semicolon. Because, of course, according to James, and let me read it to you, likewise, was not Rahab the prostitute also fulfill the works by which you welcome the messengers and send them out another road? This is in the book of James. Of all the people that you can identify to elevate to a place where they have acted on their faith, transactional for sure, Rahab is identified. This Rahab, by the way, and in case, I love it, just in case you forgot that she was a prostitute, I just want to emphasize that James reminded you she was a prostitute. And it's an important reminder because there is no kind of like, let me sort of, now that she has done something good, let me just whitewash this. No. The messenger of God will not be restricted. God will use whomever. You and me. And sometimes the moment comes unbidden, unexpected, unplanned. Sometimes the same way circumstances in our lives happen. And the men show up there. But then there is something else. I'm really going to put you to the test. See these names up here? I know you're thinking, Hemchand, you're making up stories here. No, they're right out of the Bible. It's what you read every night, I'm sure. It's what you've heard, no doubt, in the lectionary reading. Anyone? No, we haven't. But they're here. Keep track. Out of Aram, there's Aminadab, there's Nashon. And out of Nashon, right? Look at the genealogy here, folks. Look at the genealogy here. Nashon gave the son, Salmon, with Rahab, right? Who, by the way, through Boaz, who would lead through Ruth, right, gave rise to Obed, who gave rise to Jesse, who gave rise to David. I mean, so when we say that genealogy matters, where have you come from? And what do we have here? We have this extraordinary moment between Rahab and Ruth that interconnect to lead to Israel's greatest king, flawed, but greatest king, David. What role, what possible role could an outsider play? What possible role could a stranger play? Yeah, we could look at Janet Jagan and think, well, yeah, I mean, they fell in love and she went and, sort of. But we can't just dismiss that as a contemporary, as a current idea. And we can't dismiss this idea of the intersection in the lives of two outsiders who would lead to David ultimately. And not only that, again, I'm not trying to be silly here, not just us in this room here, but sometimes we get so kind of wrapped up only with the stuff that we can immediately see in front of us. So the new shiny object that is here, right, that is the sort of shiny object du jour. That's what interests us, right? That's what interests us. But what about that which came before? What about that which came before that came? Generations, look at this, generation after generation after generation, that we may never see what one act today could mean for our children and their children and their children and their children. But this story reminds us that sometimes out of generations will come something that is so momentous and transformative in the life of a people, of a nation, of a family, of a community, of a world, that nothing will again remain the same. And we see it here.
So there's only one generation between Rahab and Ruth? Salmon?
No.
Salmon?
Boaz, her son.
Boaz, and then Obed,
Yeah, I mean,
and then Jesse.
you're getting this from Matthew, right? The first chapter of Matthew.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the first Matthew, the New Testament, saw it fit to talk about genealogy. You know, what we, in the King James, we used to call it what? The begats, right? Somebody begat somebody who begat somebody who begat. No one speaks that way. It's a reminder while we are not reading, you know. But that's what it was. Welcoming the stranger. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit. I thought we'd, again, talk a little bit about Rahab, in part because it's someone who actually welcomes the stranger in the Bible, and who, by any definition, should not be the one that should be chosen, right? We want these characters to be pristine. But we human beings are deeply flawed. I don't know how else to put it.
Why do we want them to be pristine?
Because in a way,
I don't necessarily see that.
no, you may not, I may not, we may not in this room, right? But we believe that messengers, right, ought to have some kind of standing, ought to have a kind of status, ought to have a station in life. I mean, look around in this nation.
We want to look up to them.
Right. Who looks up to this person? I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, right? We talk about what do we want with our leaders. It's one thing to have a flawed leader. Let me rephrase that. It's one thing to have a deeply flawed leader. And who thinks that adverbs and adjectives are irrelevant? But it's another thing to have a deeply flawed leader who continues to be deeply flawed. Because you are incapable of carrying a message of goodness and grace and inclusiveness. And by the way, we live in a kind of a crazy world. I hope I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. I'll give you an idea of how silly some of this is. Literally, this is a couple days ago. I saw this, just something posted. There's a group called the Flat Earth Society, right?
The what society?
The Flat Earth, right? It's an actual group. And the leader of that group posted something, boasting, and I'm not making this up. The leader of the Flat Earth Society posted something that says, the Flat Earth Society is alive and well globally. I want you to pause and think about how absolutely categorically nuts that is. Because, of course, we live in a time where irony is lost. You want to say, step back and just listen to what you just said. This is the world in which we live. So we are torn between laughter, which, by the way, is a scarcity, and joy, to despair. So Jonah. Let me open this up. What do we know about Jonah? By the way, it's not a trick question and it's not a rhetorical question. What do we know about Jonah? I'm gonna sort of take all of these answers and then sift through them.
Not his genealogy.
Not his genealogy. By the way, it does say where he came from, who his father was, son of Amittai. So there is a little bit of that. It doesn't go back generations,
Yeah,
right?
it's not connected to other characters.
What else?
Fish.
What? Prophet?
He didn't want to go to Nineveh.
He didn't want to go to Nineveh.
He got thrown out of the boat by the sailors because they were mad at God, and he got swallowed by a fish thing.
Did you say a fishish? Okay. What else do we know about Jonah?
He disobeyed the Lord and paid the price.
He disobeyed the Lord and paid the price?
Yes.
What price did he pay?
Got stuck in a whale.
Yeah. But we have 4 chapters of Jonah here. And we end up thinking of Jonah, well, obviously a prophet. I think to say reluctant would be an understatement. Swallowed by,
Well, we're having a question about what got swallowed by.
well, just for the record, it no more says whale than Genesis says apple. Just be very clear about that. But we have established this, right? And maybe it's a whale because if it's a shark, he'll be ripped up coming out. So I don't know. There is that. I mean, I'm very practical that way. Yeah. But what else do we know?
He didn't want them to be saved.
He didn't. You know, isn't that a strange thing? That I will decide who deserves grace or not. And I will put blinders on God. Right? I want you to focus. Janet. What? Forget about it. That's what Jonah wants. But here's what sets him apart from every other prophet. He is the only prophet that God calls to go to foreigners. He's the only prophet. All of the rest to the people. It's the only and here's the thing. It's a reminder that grace is not reserved only for the insiders. I know it hurts us to think that we're the only ones, but the answer is no. It's not reserved only for us. And here is the thing that is really painful for me to say. Jonah is an insider. He's one of us. By the way, this is not a time to say, I wash my hands of Jonah. He's not one of us. He is one of us. He's an insider who's being told, I want you to go to Nineveh. And you say, nice try. I'm not doing that. Right? He's the only one who is sent as an outside to go to foreigners. So, just for the record, that should give us an idea why we think that Tarshish is someplace in Spain. So, what we do know is that this is not just hiding next door under the bed, right? It's interesting, so I will read some of this for us. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, saying, Go at once to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness had come upon me. Okay? What is interesting is that I want you to go and make a pronouncement to this great city. By the way, great here, just for the record, okay, is not, sometimes, the word could mean a variety of things, right? Great as in just a wonderful person. This is not it. This is just great as in large, right? Sometimes we use this language like we have minor prophets and major prophets. Why are the minor prophets minor? The books are short. That's it. right? The major prophets, the books are long. There's nothing major and minor in terms of importance. So go to that great city, okay? But before Jonah, but Jonah set out to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. By the way, you know, this is sort of like almost philosophy 101 here. Actually, this is sort of like remedial philosophy, okay? If you have a flawed premise, what will happen to the conclusion? It doesn't really matter how you build it and how attractive it looks and how wonderful your language and structure might be, the conclusion will be flawed. That is a fact. And so the first premise here that Jonah establishes, that he believes that he could do what? Run from the presence of the Lord. I hate to break the news to you. You cannot run from the presence of the Lord. You can run from Alan, because Alan can't really run fast. But you cannot run from the presence of the Lord. Actually, you can walk away from Alan even, because he will not be able to catch you. So he says, so he went down to Joppa and found the ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare, all right? I mean, you know, you have to do what the law requires, right? He paid the fare, went on board to go with them away from the presence of the Lord. Okay? Because God belongs to whom? Us. It's one of us, right? Except, of course, thank you for playing no. Okay? There is that small matter of God being the creator God for all. When you have a moment, look at the final chapter of the book, and actually towards the end of the book of Amos. Remember we talked about Amos? And at the end of that book, Amos says essentially, you know, to the Edomites and to the Ethiopians and so on, are you not just like the Israelites to me? Right? By the way, for the Israelites, that really is kind of like, that hurts me. Are you telling me the Egyptians are, actually yes, as it turns out. Yes, actually all of these people, even the Ninevites, is there the possibility of redemption for the Ninevites? The answer is yes. And sometimes part of that redemption will be predicated on our courage to take that message and to believe that everyone deserves grace. I have long felt, and I've said this actually mostly in the academy, that we should not, I've said this to faculty repeatedly, we should not ever imagine that we should leave anyone unchanged. Do not believe that, well, this person, you know, they have lived a full life. I'm not. No, we should not allow anyone, including ourselves, to remain unchanged. Because to do that, frankly, at the very least, is to show a remarkable disrespect that you're beyond change, that you're beyond redemption. I'm just going to let you be. No. Take that message to Nineveh. And he tries to run away. And in case Jonah needed to be reminded, the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and such a mighty storm came upon the sea that the ship threatened to break up. Then the sailors were, and I'm inviting you to do something here. Pay really, really, really careful attention to this next verse. And tell me what you think. Then the sailors were afraid, and each cried to his God. They threw the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. Jonah, meanwhile, had gone down into the hold of the ship, laid down and was fast asleep. The captain came and said to him, What are you doing sound asleep? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps the God will spare us a thought, so we do not perish. The sailors said to one another, come, let us cast lots, so they may know on whose account this calamity has come upon us. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah, and they said to him, tell us why this calamity has come upon you. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What's your country of your people? I'm a Hebrew. He said, I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. What do you think of the sailors? Right? And that would describe them as what? These are religious people, right? It may not be the same God, but they immediately went and began praying. Meanwhile, our man on the inside is fast asleep. By the way, you can imagine that, both literally, but imagine that as a metaphor. Keeping the grace to myself while I'm sound asleep, heading out of the range of God's grace. And of course, then we have all of the questions, right? Here is the thing. Jonah knows that the God in whom he believes is a creator God. He does. Because, how do we know that? He confesses this. It's such a remarkable reminder, the fact that you know something. I don't know which is worse. That you know something and don't act in it, or that you don't know, and you think that ignorance is a bliss. Jonah knows. He knows. And in a way, this is worse. He knows. And he runs away. The men were afraid, and they were fleeing from the presence of the Lord. So here then they said, what shall we do to you, that the sea may quiet down for us? For the sea was growing more and more tempestuous, and he said to them, pick me up and throw me into the sea, and the sea will quiet down, for I know it's because of me that the great storm has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring the ship. What do you think of the sailors? I have to tell you, given the choice between Jonah and the sailors here, I'm going to go with the sailors, right? The sailors did not throw Jonah overboard initially. Even though he said, listen, I'm the one who is to be blamed for this. If you cast me overboard, all will be well. And what do the sailors do? No. Because there is something, maybe even for the outsider, where decency matters. And they don't throw him overboard. Not yet. But they could not, for the sea grew more and more stormy against them. Then they cried out to the Lord. All of a sudden, right? Here is the thing. They all prayed to their own God, and nothing happened. And they now have come to believe that it is the God of Jonah, Yahweh, who is responsible. By the way, have they seen any evidence of this so far? What is interesting is that they still, up to this point, do not know who brought on this storm. They're taking, strangely enough, they're taking Jonah's word for it here. Jonah said, well, actually, it's the Lord who's brought it on.
But they cast lots.
They cast lots, by the way. And again, I know you and I are thinking, boy, what a strange way to figure out things, right? But we've known that in the Old Testament and, of course, with the garment of Jesus later on. But the idea of casting lots. And the story that we heard about, from Pastor Dave this morning. It was not casting lots, but you and I are listening to that story and you're thinking, I'm not sure. But it matters. And the lot fell on Jonah. And they cried out to the Lord, please, O Lord, we pray, do not let us perish on account of this man's life. Do not make us They are concerned about Jonah's life. Do not make us guilty of innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it has pleased you. Who are you? I'll tell you who I am. I'll tell you what I believe. What's the problem? The fact that I'm telling you all of this evidently doesn't matter.
The question is, why didn't Jonah jump in on his own?
Do not confuse me with these questions. Why doesn't Jonah? By the way, you talk about a guy who needs a modicum of courage, right? Jonah meet Rahab, right? Of course he doesn't jump in.
But he knows.
He knows. Often, whether or not one could take this to a logical conclusion, often someone would say, what's the distinction between ethics and morality? And one might say, well, ethics tells me that according to the law, I should be driving at 65 miles an hour. My own moral conscience tells me, yeah, I'm going to try 75. Okay? By the way, it doesn't go to a logical conclusion. The fact that you know the right thing doesn't always mean that you will do the right thing. Jonah, I suppose, this is the irony here, right? The sailors saved Jonah's life, and Jonah has a chance to save theirs, and chose otherwise. And they offered a sacrifice, but the Lord provided a large fish to swallow up Jonah after he threw him overboard, and he was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Don't think too hard about the symbolism here, by the way. Right? Here's the thing, and we have to stop here, but here's the thing. I want you to, first of all, hang on to that litany that I printed out. Okay? And if you don't have a copy, pick up a copy. I think it might, in my view anyway, I think it's a litany that should help us, again, think through the role of the stranger, both the ones who are among us and the ones who are coming to us, but also think through what our role might be. And the qualification for accepting the stranger is not based on perfection, it's not based on any of those kinds of things that we create, right? We will enter the realm as flawed human beings. Sometimes, I'll speak in all seriousness, sometimes we're deeply flawed, but as flawed human beings. And we are reminded again and again that God does not set out to choose the perfect messenger. Why? Because that person does not exist. Okay? All right. We have to stop there. We'll talk more about Jonah next Sunday. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.